Hello everyone, I'm Mathieu Renard. I'm working at the Hardware and Software Security Labs of ANSSI. And with my coworker Riyad, last year we wrote a paper about security offense and defense strategies in the gaming console world. And this because we are thinking that some of these gaming consoles are technology showcases regarding security matters. Some still have vulnerabilities, but anyway, at their time, they were flagship regarding security. So how we can explain that? It is simply, what? Sorry for that. It's not on my side. Took. Sorry for that. Moi c'était bon, mais là-bas il n'y avait rien. Mais... Ça va être bon. Non, c'est 2 minutes. And...
Okay, just while we are waiting.
Yeah, it's working again.
Okay.
Okay, so why we are interested in gaming console security? It is because we are thinking that some of them were and some others still are flagship regarding security matters. Especially because video game industry actors are spending a lot of money fighting against piracy and counterfeiting, but also because they want to keep the control of their platforms. So in this talk, I will try to highlight the security-based and worst practices we have seen studying the PlayStation 1, the first Xbox, the Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3, and I will talk a little bit about the PlayStation 4. So here we go. I'm starting our gaming console, and no. Anyway, our first player is the PlayStation 1, which was produced by Sony Computer Entertainment in 1994. And was targeted by Mass Hacking starting in 1995. It was probably due to the lack of security by design. When Sony engineers designed this gaming console, they simply removed the memory management unit, which was the only security feature integrated to their CPU. But on the other hand, they decided to implement some digital right management features in order to do regional zoning. So the concept is pretty simple. If you buy a French gaming console, you can't play the Japanese games or the American games. How it works, it's very simple. There is an ASCII string stored in the BIOS of the console, and the same string is written using the DRM on the CD-ROM. The DRM is the wobble groove, and it prevents perfect game clones because the DRM information is stored on the leading track of the CD-ROM, but it is written on the side of the track, not like all the data with hole and bumps on the track. Despite this DRM, and probably due to the lack of security feature, attackers have set up many attacks, and the first of them was the action replay attack. And it was also the beginning of the mod chips in the gaming environment. How explain the first attack? It's pretty simple. If you have a look to the PlayStation 1 architecture, you can find the CPU, the video parts and audio and the CD-ROM, but what I'm looking for, it is the boot ROM on the bottom left of the presentation, which is connecting to the CPU using a data bus, which is classic, but this data bus is also connected to the parallel I/O extension port on the right of the gaming console. And there is also an interesting signal from the attacker point of view, which is the output enable, which allows any device connected to the extension port to hijack the boot ROM by disabling it, and to run their code. So this was patched by Sony simply by releasing a new hardware version of the platform, and attacker has to study the Wobble Groove architecture in order to understand how the DRM was working. And they find out that the DRM signal is transported over the Wobble Groove, over the error tracking signal on the green on the left. And they decided to emulate it. Because if we can't reproduce it on the CD-ROM, maybe we can emulate it and at the right time and then run the gaming. That's how works the mod chips on the PlayStation 1. They decided to put a little chip inside other device, which is pretty interesting in the concept. So on the PlayStation 1, there were no security feature, which allows attacker to bypass all the DRM feature, and it was the birth of the mod chip, and it was a fail. I think Sony lost a lot of money with game copy at this time. Our second player is the first Xbox, which was launched by Microsoft in 2001. The architecture is pretty similar to a PC, and the kernel is based on Windows 2K. It embeds some security feature, and it is very interesting because they try to implement secure boot, and in 2001 it was pretty early to find that kind of feature in a device and public device. So like I said, here is the architecture of the Xbox. It is very close to the CPU, except that the North Bridge is merged with the GPU on the same chips, and in the South Bridge, we can find a secret boot ROM. This secret boot ROM is the same thing as your BIOS on a PC. This is the first code that is executed when the console is starting. Regarding the security, there is some signed binaries, there is a restricted access on the hard drives, and there is the secure boot chain. So at this time, like I said, there were no public device within a secure boot chain. So how Microsoft did its root of trust, it was to burn the first code, the root of trust, inside the South Bridge. But it is very expensive to store data, to store code inside another chip. So they decided to limit the code size to 512 bytes. But they were facing the problem that the training, the DDR training was bigger than that, so they came with a solution which was adding flash memory outside the CPU in order to protect the data stored in this memory. They decided to encrypt some part of this data. So how everything works, at first start you have the MCPX, which is the south bridge within the flash, within the boot ROM. There is some code inside. This code is, there is some memory overlay, so this code is mapped over the flash ROM. At start, the secret boot ROM execute some bytecode in order to decrypt and verify the second stage bootloader, which decrypt and execute the kernel, which at its turn verify and execute the game. So we have basic security feature. We have a secure boot with a chain of trust. We have code signing, and we have DRM. So how attackers deal with that? They start by dumping the flash content, but they didn't find nothing. And after that, they try to find a way to extract the boot RAM content. And then there were a lot of vulnerabilities I won't describe today. The first vulnerability is pretty interesting because the code is inside a chip that you can't extract. But this chip is on the south bridge, and the code has to move to the CPU to be executed. So if an attacker is able to eavesdrop the data on the bus, he can retrieve the secure code. Microsoft made the assumption that 200 megahertz was too fast for that someone without expensive tool was able to extract the code to monitor the bus. But a PhD student called Bunny decided to use his thesis project, which was a custom FPGA board, in order to dump all the data. And starting from this point, attacker found about 17 critical vulnerability, and the chain of trust was killed forever. But it is interesting to see that in 2001, Microsoft attempted to use a secure boot chain. They made mistakes, but still, it was the first. They were the first on this subject. The boot ROM size was critical for security because if all the code were stored in the same place, maybe people didn't learn how and where the secret boot ROM was. Not encrypted, the data transiting on the hypertransport bus was not a good idea because with $100 you can set up a tools and dump all the data coming through this bus. And finally, all the DRM features were fully bypassed. But Microsoft learned and designed the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 came with PowerPC, which is pretty original for Microsoft. The architecture is still close to a PC, except we have a 64-byte, sorry for that, a 64-byte processor. And we only need 32 bits in order to map the whole memory because we have only 512 megabytes of memory. So the idea here is to use the upper 32 bits in order to transport metadata and in order to provide hashing and integrity checking feature and also encryption feature of the memory. Since we can store all the hashes for the whole memory, only critical parts are integrity checked. Especially, Microsoft wants to protect the hypervisor. It is also the first time we are seeing some virtualization in gaming console, and the hypervisor is the key point regarding security on this platform. It is only 100 of kilobits, and it is encrypted and integrity checked. Since we can't do integrity checks on the kernel code and on the gaming code, this part is just encrypted. And in order to exchange data between the peripheral and the GPU and the processor, all data are just not encrypted, and there is no integrity check. Anyway, that's not a big deal because Microsoft using write XOR execute permissions, so the setup is pretty cool regarding security. There is also some anti-downgrade feature because if someone finds a vulnerability, you patch the vulnerability, but if the attacker is able to fall back to the vulnerable version, you lose the fight. So Microsoft decided to set up anti-downgrade feature, which is based on the e-fuse, which is like a real fuse. If you burn it, there is no fallback. You can go back in, and you can only write 0 on the e-fuse set. These e-fuses are also used in order to generate a custom CPU key in the factory process. And the idea about the anti-downgrade feature is to blow an e-fuse each time you are doing an upgrade. And this value is going through an hash mark within the CPU key. Like that, you are unable to make a copy of the content of the flash, the memory, and write it to another gaming console and start it. All this prevent copy. There is also a secure boot, but it is very complicated, and I will skip this part for this presentation. And regarding the attacks, it comes with the first hack, which is the hack of the DVD player, which is the same hack than we found on the first Xbox. But the first really interesting attack is the King Kong attack. I will detail in a few minutes. And then there is some hardware attack, and let's start with the software parts. The software vulnerability is due to an improper integer comparison in the hypervisor syscall handler. Long story short, it allowed to disable the integrity check and the encryption on the hypervisor. How it works? Attackers found a game, King Kong, which was not encrypting the shaders. The shaders is some code who run on the GPU, and they were considering that code as data, so there were no integrity checks. So attackers decided to put their payload instead of the shaders, and like this, they gain direct memory access and were able to set up a new syscall in the hypervisor memory. But that's not sufficient. They also overwrite the thread state on the standard memory, which allows them to build a wrap chain and finally trigger the rogue syscall and bypass the whole security. The problem is that this vulnerability has been patched before being public. So attackers focus their research to downgrade to a vulnerable kernel. But there is, remember, there is an diffuse protection. So they studied the code stored in the flash and found that there is a non-constant time memcompare in the second stage bootloader. This can be exploited in order to forge a valid hashmark without knowing the CPU key. How it works is pretty simple. You have a standard memcompare, which returns when the first difference is found. So if you are able to measure the time between the entry and the exit of the function, you are able to know if the testing byte is okay. So the first one was not okay, the second one is not okay, but the third byte here, at the third byte we see that the time is increasing, so the byte is valid. So we skip to the next byte and so on. This is possible because attackers are able to synchronize with the boot process using the post port, which is a debug port on which status code of the boot process are written. This was finally patched by Microsoft because it is a hardware way to exploit a software vulnerability. But attacker comes with another attack, which is called the glitch attack. There is another check when the fourth stage, when the second stage bootloader verifies the first stage. And the idea is to launch a glitch on the reset lines in order to not reset the full CPU, but only reset some registers. But in order to do that within a CPU running at 3 GHz, you have to be pretty fast. So the first thing here is to slow down the CPU, and that can be done by using the CPU PLL bypass signal, which divides the frequency of the frequency of the CPU by a factor 100 or something. So they start to slow down the CPU, and then they sent a 100 nanosecond glitch on the reset line, and this allows to bypass the check. Why this works is pretty simple. You still have a memcompare, and here the result of the memcompare is tested within the 0 value. So if you reset all the CPU, you have 0 in the registers, so you can pass the check. This vulnerability was pretty hard to patch, but it was easy for attacker to build some commercial module. If you hack, if you have been hacked, if you hacked your game console, you have probably that kind of device on the box. So regarding the Xbox 360, we have a good software architecture. We have a tiny auditable hypervisor. We have exploit mitigation within the write XOR execute protection. All the code is signed. We have a secure boot process. We have anti-downgrade protection, but still there is some direct memory access attack possible, and some data were stored in, especially the thread states were stored in writable memory by user, so it was possible to exploit the King Kong attack. There is also some cryptographic weakness. At this time, Microsoft liked very much the RC4. And the console was not designed with hardware attacks in mind. This is why only the last generation of the Xbox 360 is not vulnerable to the glitch. come back to Sony. Within the PlayStation 3, Sony decided to switch to a Cell broadband engine processor, which based on 64 bits PowerPC architecture. So here on the left, you have the main processor, the PowerPC. And around this processor, you have 8 cores called Synergic Processor Engine, or SPE, Synergistic Processor Engine. And usually, these processors are used for parallel computation. Here, they are used as a secure enclave in order to bootstrap the boot chain. How it works? At start, the main processor sends encrypted codes to the boot ROM of the SPE, of one SPE. And this code is decrypted in the SRAM of the SPE. And the SPE enters in the isolated mode, which means this is a secure enclave. No one can access to this code, and no one can extract it. Regarding the bootloaders, like I said, the first level and second level are run from the SPE. So at this time, we don't know much about this code. There is a hypervisor, also the Game and other OS, and some application. The hypervisor, the Game OS, other OS, and application are running on the main processor. The boot chain is also very complicated, but the only thing we need to remember is that the first and second stage of bootloader are encrypting using hardware CPU key, and the other bootloaders or other applications are encrypted using software encryption keys. This is very important because if a vulnerability is found in the first or second stage bootloader, Sony has lost the game because they can't update these parts. And another interesting point here is that the hypervisor is outside the trusting computing base because sensitive elements are only executed on the SPE. All the code is encrypted and signed. This is clearly security through obscurity. All data going through the internal bus or going to the peripheral are also encrypted, so direct memory access attacks are limited. But there is no write or execute protection regarding the hypervisor. The hypervisor on the PlayStation 3 is very few, almost nothing. It is not protected, and it is not verifying anything. Anyway, attacks came a long time after the launch of the PS3, but probably because researchers were able to launch Linux on the platform. Then Geohot set up a vulnerability, a glitch vulnerability, in order to take the control of the hypervisor. This vulnerability was only interesting for researchers because it was the entry point for reverse engineering, but it was not possible to do game piracy. But within this entry point, researchers found the PS jailbreak, which this time allows game piracy. This vulnerability is targeting the USB stack of the Game OS. And since we don't have WXORX protection, they can take control of the hypervisor. But the major vulnerability on the PlayStation 3 is cryptographic fails. In the Sony ECDSA, because they were using nonces, the same nonces for the different firmware versions. This allows attacker to compute the private key within two signatures. And here, all the boot chain was completely and forever broken because attackers were able to retrieve the private keys and the security model was broken. So, as a conclusion for the PlayStation 3, we have an interesting and exotic hardware platform. The DMA attack mitigation is really important. The concept of the boot ROM running on a dedicated CPU within encryption key, hardware encryption key is very interesting, but Sony didn't do any defense in depth feature, so they were hacked, and it was the fall of the PlayStation 3. Now, what Sony did with the PlayStation 4 is to come back to standard architecture. It is an x86 x86 64 architecture, and it is the same CPU as the Xbox One. Regarding the software architecture, Sony, this time Sony based its kernel on the FreeBSD 9 kernel. And unlike for the PlayStation 3, Sony bases its user-learned system on open source software, which include WebKit, OpenSSL, and the LLVM toolchain. There is some security feature. We have Secure Boot. We have the same concept of encrypted binaries. We have modern security feature coming with the kernel. And we don't have, so far, any information regarding the hardware security. Anyway, the first attack was an hardware attack. Set up by a Brazilian team. They were able to clone a game console by dumping the memory content of a memory flash and writing them to another console. Like this, two users were sharing the same PlayStation Network account, but this was quickly patched by Sony, and then attackers decided to go to the software way. The software way is very interesting. It starts with a WebKit vulnerability, since we don't have much on treatment on the software parts. And the idea is to go up to the kernel. So the first true software attacks is the same vulnerability that other attackers found on the PS Vita. And this vulnerability will be the first entry point for reverse engineering. The problem is when you want to port this vulnerability to the PlayStation 4, you have to deal with user-learned ASLR and WXORX. So how attacker deals with that? They exploit the vulnerability, they found an address leak. Like this, they bypass the ASLR. Then they built a rope chain in order to compromise the libkernel and then start digging in the kernel. But that was the idea, and there is some FreeBSD jails set up on the console. So attackers have to find another way to go outside to jailbreak the WebKit. So they start by finding a way to execute native code on the console. This was pretty simple. They found that syscall used in order to provide JIT feature for WebKit can be used in order to set up two shared memory which were pointing on the same physical address space. So the first pointer is mapping a shared memory within the read and execute permission, and the second pointer is pointing the same physical address space, but this time within the read-write permission. So we have the two pointers, and this allows to bypass WXORX. At this point, attacker want still want kernel privilege. So they start fusing and reverse engineering the kernel. They find some proprietary syscalls, 85, and they found that critical syscalls like Petrus were filtered by the jail. And they released an unofficial SDK, and finally fall back to a non-vulnerability, which is the bad IRET vulnerability. I will try to explain. So the bad IRET vulnerability is known and fixed in 2014 on FreeBSD, but it was not fixed on the PS4 until the version 2 of their firmware. How it works? The basic idea is to do a JS confusion. The JS is a register that maps to the JS thread when you are in userland, and it maps where the kernel thread on the kernel land. The idea is to do a JS confusion in order to be in kernel lang pointing some data in userland. To do that, in order to overwrite a pointer which in the interrupt description table in order to execute, to trick the final payload. This is possible because on FreeBSD, the IDT can be writable, and because there is no SMAP or no SMAP protection. So the address we want to overwrite will be the page fault handler, and then we will trigger a page fault in order to execute our userland payload within the kernel privilege. So here is the full exploit chain, which is pretty complicated. So as a conclusion for the PlayStation 4, Sony has moved to a classical hardware platform. They did some defense in depth, but these defense are mostly based on the FreeBSD feature. They didn't add anything to the security here. The hardware is probably not designed within security in mind, and there is big hole left during the conception phase. But still, to my knowledge, there is no way to play with backup games on the PlayStation 4 so far, and vulnerable versions have been patched by Sony. So as a general conclusion, every penny worth it when it comes to security. Attackers always choose the weakest points. They don't care about software or hardware. They just follow the path and execute their vulnerabilities in order to get the control of the software. This is why security team must be told together. It's a bad idea when someone says, okay, this part will be handled by the software team. And because the software team says, no, this part is handled by the hardware team. If teams don't talk together, that's a setup hole, and it's too late to do anything. Okay. That's it for the presentation. Do you have any question?
Hi. What does IDT stand for?
What does?
IDT.
IDT is the interrupt table. So, okay, it's okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.